Hi, here we are again with Joseph Zintsememe, the director for Bridge Network in Virginia, USA, originally from Cameroon. I am Josmar Roman, all the way from New Zealand, originally from Puerto Rico. And we are embarking on conversations around reconciliation. This is episode 3 of 3. In episode 1, we talked about what reconciliation is. In episode 2, we started talking about identity and why it even matters. And today we're going to carry on that conversation. Thank you for joining us. Joseph, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. How about yourself?
Yeah, good. Excited
Yeah.
to explore this very controversial topic
Yes.
further.
Sensitive, but very crucial at the same time.
Yeah, well, you've made it your life's mission. I mean, you've been working on the Ministry of Reconciliation, specifically as it relates to the transatlantic slave trade for, can it be 30 years, more than 30 years? Can it be that long?
Yeah, it will be more than 30 years, about 31 years now.
That's phenomenal. You've traveled the world. You've taken the message of reconciliation to almost every continent. Have you been to Asia yet? I know you've been through Europe, through Africa, the
Well,
United States.
I transit only. I transited only through Asia.
We'll have to see what we can
My,
do. I think people, especially when you think about Taiwan, Mongolia, I think we'll have to put that on the list of things that we do with God in the future.
yes, the interesting thing is that we were doing a reconciliation programs here in 2004, and there was I don't know how there was a TV network from South Korea that got wind of it. They came, they videotape it. They said they want to use that as a model between Korea and Japan. So, but I don't know
Wow.
what happened with that effort.
Wow. Wow. So there you go. Um, so you've traveled the world. You have a book coming up. It's going to be your first book on reconciliation, and it documents the beginning of your journey, and highlights some of the big moments
Yes.
in your ministry.
Mhm.
Today, you and your wife Yvette are directors of the Bridge Network. Can you tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about that?
Well, it is a youth with the mission YWAM, youth with the mission YWAM effort center that we are establishing here in the state of Virginia in the United States. Our our purpose is to be able to invest in the life of participants, our staff body, as well as participants and the student that we will be having, invest in their lives what God has taught us, what God has invested in our lives, because at this point in time of our lives and ministry, we come to understand that we have to multiply ourselves. And the best way is to create a center like this one where we could invest, take time, but invest in the life of people. And the aim is really to build and provide sort of a banqueting table to the minorities in the United States here, so they can come dine with the king and be players in the nations, be players in the nation, no longer no more spectator, but players, to influence the sphere of to bring an influence in the sphere of influence through the values of the kingdom of God.
Mm, that's great. And so you've had a discipleship training school in the past, which is 5 to 6 months. At the moment, you're running Is it a virtual seminar?
Yeah. At the moment, we started last week, Tuesday, I think it was 6. A virtual seminar, 6 hours a week, 3 days a week, Tuesdays, Thursday, and Fridays, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And so that is giving the opportunity to people who are working, going to school and working, the opportunity to have a taste of what the Bridge DTS is. And the Bridge DTS it was designed with a minority in the US in mind. It was for them actually that we designed it 10 years ago.
Mm.
Yes, and now we're being given the opportunity to implement it and serve the people with it. So the first week was very encouraging, very good. Yes.
Oh, that's fantastic. And so I just want to encourage anyone watching this video today, if you want to know more, you can send an email to YWAM, that's ywam.bridgedts@gmail.com, and
Correct.
get more information either about this seminar or future seminars.
Yes.
In the last few weeks, you were also interviewed by Joanne Richards from
Yes.
Crucial Conversations in
Yes.
Jamaica,
Yes.
and had the opportunity to talk to her and to her followers about reconciliation and about your ministry as well. How was that?
Well, that was great. I mean, in fact, that interview came about from our first interview conversation we had, you and I. So I've sent that to her and she liked it. And so she was very moved and wanted to interview me. Joanne and I, we have known each other, I think, since 2011, something like that, 2011, 2012. So we were organizing a lifeline expedition to Jamaica. A lifeline expedition was a ministry of reconciliation, aiming to bring a message of apology and healing to the African descendant due to the legacy of the transatlantic slave trade. And so Joanne Richard was introduced to us by someone who have heard of us and what we were trying to do, and so we have stayed in contact ever since. She's a very uh, wonderful Christ Center dear sister that have a heart not only to bring the gospel in a context where the people of Jamaica and other people will identify with Christ, and so the gospel will not be foreign to them. So that is her heart, and of course, where it make a kindred spirit between her, her and I. So that conversation was very electrified and very, very good, very good conversation.
Well, that's fantastic. I don't think I would expect anything less than electrifying when you're having a conversation with a Jamaican.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's really good to hear. So in our first episode, because we're talking about reconciliation, one of the things that we did was try to wrap around a working definition, and just to give a really brief summary. In one of the chapters near the end of the book, you talk about Dr. Stephen Wells.
Yes.
And you quote some of what he shared about his experience.
Yes.
And he says, ending his conversation about his experience, he says, the ministry of reconciliation is more than just uniting people to the motherland.
Yeah.
It is really about healing, forgiveness, restoration, and the peace of God.
Yes.
There is truly no price on how much joy this brings to God the Father and to the human soul.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he put it
Wow.
very well. Yeah, that's a great summary. Yeah. I don't know if we will talk about our trip to Africa with Dr. Wells, but we had the opportunity of being co-speakers in a leadership and pastoral conference in Central African nation of Gabon. So that's where we met the first time, and so he being an African descendant, and I had the opportunity really. I said, wow, this is a blessing to have him here. Let us bless him, so he will return home filled with a blessing and so happy to have been in a motherland. And so we held ceremonies of reconciliation and adoption back to the lands of Africa, lands of his ancestor, and spoke blessing over his life. And that was very empowering to him. Uh, and something he said, he confided to me that he have never thought about, something like that experience. He wish all African descendants to have such experience, because it's
Mm,
such fulfilling, but it is more than fulfilling, it is empowering,
mm,
and then leading people at a place of rest, like he said it in his conclusion.
mm. And just um, to spoil the story, he went back home after that experience, and he decided to get a DNA test done to
Yes,
find out where he was from.
correct.
And
Yes,
it turns out that he is from Gabon.
his
He was
ancestor
home.
his ancestor came from Gabon and Cameroon.
So he was you and the other leaders organized a homecoming, welcoming, ceremony, a ritual, and he was actually home.
Yeah, he was home.
That was Holy Spirit driven. That was just,
Yes, in
and
fact,
there was no way that anyone could have known except God.
yes. In fact, the whole thing was really guided by the Holy Spirit. The invitation that were addressed to him by my friends, the host pastor, and him accepting the invitation to go there, and then me being part of the speakers with that experience, that knowledge and understanding, and then leading that ceremony. All of that, when you look back, you say, wow, this is God's. Because it's not something that we orchestrated. So it was mind blowing after he got the result of his test, DNA test, that he was actually at the land of his ancestors. And the amazing thing is that Gabon and Cameroon, from where his ancestors came from, are next door to each other. I mean, we sharing the same border, Cameroon and Gabon. I mean, how amazing is this?
Yeah, and it just reaffirms and confirms, I think, that it does matter to God. He does care, and we'll continue exploring that and continue talking about it. But that leads into, our second episode. We talked about just that, why our identity matters. And you talked about the fact that we are made in God's image. Um, and that he created us, he created every facet of us, he determined our culture, our land, our place of birth, our family, our heritage. And these are things that matter to God. And so for more of that, um, our listeners and our viewers will have to go back to episode 2. But at the end of episode 2, we finished up talking about how the nations met, the transatlantic slave trade, how it all unfolded over the last more than 500 years, and how it could have been different. A lot of people justify the transatlantic slave trade, justify the subjugation of Africa and Africans and of the indigenous people, and try to make it right and try to say, you know, no, this was God's will. This is the way it should be. This is the way it was meant to be. And so it's okay. I don't believe that, but I know that this is a huge area of controversy. And so we talked about picking it back up and talking about it some more today. I know it's a huge topic,
Yes.
and so we can only really touch upon it, but you do have a chapter in your book also dedicated to that, or maybe more than one, but the first one, you call it Insinuating Ideology.
Correct. Yes, and by the way, the book that has been long in wait is coming very soon. It's coming very soon, probably in 4 or 5 months. We'll be able to present the book to our audience and have them pick from wherever they are. So yeah, so in that book we debated that question is really controversial, and we can just briefly talk about it today. So we really have to be careful to attribute to God the things that mankind is doing to satisfy his pride, to satisfy his ego. We have to be careful to attribute that to God. That's the first point I want to make, because not everything that mankind is doing, nations are doing to each other, are from God. And so we have also to be careful to take one example in the history and make it a standard that every time something like this happen, it's mean God. You understand what I mean? Yeah, so we really have to be careful with that. So, you know, the European nation, before the transatlantic slave trade happened, the European nations and the African nation have somewhat some exchanges, diplomatic exchanges, and trade exchanges.
International treaties.
Yes, and even treaties. You see, so you have that. You have kings in Africa who were sending people to Europe to go discover the European culture and study and learn. And so the African were the European were also coming to Africa and exchanging like this friendly exchange. There were no there were not these conflicts of, okay, let's go subjugate the African and so forth. So because of the Christopher Columbus landing in the Americas and the appeal to Europe to come and occupy the lands in the Americas, which belonged to the indigenous people, and the great needs in Europe to develop their economy and so forth and expand their empires. That's when the transatlantic slave trade came about. You know, that's why it came about in a nutshell. And so if we want to say that it was the African needed to be subjugated by the European, you have really to come out with stronger argument than what has been portrayed before, because there were not inferiority between or superiority between Africa and Europe. Before that, there was not something like this. So
not just that, but just, you know, very specifically, and I'm not wonderful at remembering details on the fly, but there was the West African king who decided that he would parade his wealth and tens of thousands of them went from West Africa through Egypt all the
Yeah,
way
yeah. Mansa
to
Kankan.
Germany.
Mansa Kankan. Yeah. Mansa Kankan from Mali.
From Mali, that's right.
Yeah.
And history tells us that he and his people, his thousands of people,
yeah,
they freely and lavishly spent so much gold on their journey that it lowered the value of gold in Egypt.
correct.
For many years. The value of gold in Egypt was so low because there was so many of it, because when he went through, he just spent money like crazy.
Yeah. He distributed gold even to the beggars, giving them gold. You know, the history say he was, and then when they put his wealth, even today, that he's still the wealthy man on earth, the wealth that they have, you know. And the interesting thing is that his predecessor went into took an expedition to come and explore the Americas.
Wow.
The first year, he first sent expedition to the Americas, and something happened. They drowned, and one escaped and went back and they reported to him. So he said, no, he himself ought to go and lead the expedition. He took, I can't remember how many boats.
It was huge.
Yes,
Yeah.
Yes. So he went into the expedition. I think there were like 12,000 people that he took with him to come to cross the Atlantic and explore this side of the Atlantic. He never returned. So we don't know exactly what happened. He probably crossed some of the African, managed to cross all the way to the Americas, but never returned. That is a strong possibility. So you have economically, politically, and scientifically well advanced kingdom in Africa. We just don't want to get into comparison, you know. But you had very well developed and structured kingdoms that have to envy no one on the face of the earth on the continent of Africa.
And that had relationships with the rest of the world. I think our mind today is very warped about what the world was, you know, before the 1400s. I think it's very funny when we talk about history in the West in the English language and we talk about the Dark Ages. And I go, the Dark Ages for who?
Yeah,
that's a good all over question. The world.
Whoever came out with the concept of the Dark Ages, we have to think that Dark Ages was regional, not worldwide. You see, the same thing that we have with World War I, World War II. No, that was a European war. You see, this was European war. Was not everybody were not involved in this war, although you know European colony were taken from Africa to go fight in Europe, but it was mainly a European war. You see?
Yeah. I think what we're talking about is perspective, and our brains have been, you know, pushed towards one very particular perspective. But one of the beautiful things about children, and my children have only just started school, I homeschooled them for the first few years of their lives, so they've not been brainwashed yet. And my daughter is 7, and she said to me, "Mom, I feel bad for England." And I said, "Oh, how come?" And she said, "Because they're so far away at the end of the world, over there in the bottom of the earth." And I just, Perspective is everything. You know, when you're seven
Perspective is everything. See,
and you're born in New Zealand,
you think that
and
the
New
end of the
Zealand,
boat, the bottom is over there.
yeah, if we're at the top and we're
Yeah,
at the center, then those poor British people are falling off the planet,
that's
you
right.
know, far away from civilization.
That's right.
And
Mhm.
I love it.
Yeah. So you see the ideas, some of these ideology were start being circulated by slave merchants and plantation owners because they have to justify in Europe why the African. So you have to come out with the justification. So one of the some of the justification were the African need to be civilized, and they cannot be civilized in their own continent. So we have to take them out to go and civilize them in Africa. And some of the justification were we need to go and Christianize the African. So Christianizing the Africa way, taking them from the continent, putting them in a stock and in a dangerous, perilous voyages all the way to the Americas at the risk of millions that dies during the transatlantic slave trade to go Christianize the Africa. You see, so and then other justification was where the African do not have soul, so they cannot die, go to hell or heaven. So they are perfect to be enslaved. Then you have people using the Bible to justify that they were cursed by God. Noah cursed them, and then so that is why they ought to be enslaved. You see, so you come out with different ideologies to justify because your own people, your own children will be questioning you. You see, they will be asking questions. Why this? You see, and so these are the some of the justification. And unfortunately, they kept on spreading and spreading, and those ideologies developing, and they becoming like scientific ideologies that even African and African descent came to believe and accept it. You see?
And that was the justification of why, they were giving, and there were so many other justifications as well that I don't even want to repeat, but they had their justification for why they were doing it at the time. And then since then, they've I don't know how early it started, but I know at least in the 1960s and the 1950s, they were talking about how it was God's will. God did this so that he could, the Africans in the New World could become Christians, and now they can go back. And so he was enslaving them like Joseph, and now Joseph can go back. And you address that in your book.
Yes, that is also addressed in our book. You see, the gospel was very strong in Africa, and historically, there's no discussion of that. In East Africa, Northern Africa, the greatest theologians that helped to shape Christianity, they were African. Many of them,
I mean, to be
were
fair,
African.
not a lot of, I don't know who you're hanging out with, but not a lot of the people that I have met over the years, over the decades, have known that, and people, even in the New Testament, God takes the time to talk about, is it Stephen going and speaking to the eunuch who was waiting for him?
Yeah, Philip.
It was Philip. Philip
Yeah.
goes, the eunuch was waiting for him, and to consider a eunuch was someone of power, that's a powerful position. They are serving the royal household. They are a person of influence.
Queen Candace. Yes.
They're a person of influence. And so, it is so clear to see that the gospel was spreading into Africa. But
the gospel spread it to Africa before you reach Europe. That's the reality and the truth. It reached Africa before it reached Europe. Like I said, also in addition to that, you have a great theologian that helped to shape Christianity, and a lot of them were Africa. Plus, there's no need of enslaving, oppressing a people in order to bring them the gospel. I mean, you cannot justify such a teaching, because I have read and read over the teaching of Jesus Christ. I have not seen anything but the opposite of such ideologies.
Yeah, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free.
Exactly. He came to set the captive free. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to bring good news to the poor, to heal the brokenhearted, to declare the year of a favor of the Lord. How do you implement such a message? By oppressing people? You understand? And unfortunately, that has given a terrible image to the person of Jesus Christ. The Savior of the world, the one that came humble himself to serve and care the people, his subjects. He took the form of human being and became like a servant to all of us. Now, we debated all of this in our books, so I don't want to go too much in detail, but let me just add to what I have said already. To present him like an oppressor who take you, terrorize you, before he can communicate to you the good news. How is that good news? How is that the year of favor of the Lord to the slaves and the native, the indigenous people of the Americas, who will see their land taken in the name of God, in the name of civilization? Come on, what kind of civilization is this? You see, and the indigenous people who have lived here for thousands of years, they will be confined in a reservation, and they become slaves in their own land. And for some of them, they have no more right like a residency. They become like a stranger in their own land. Can you believe that? Their culture is changed, their names are changed, and they are forced to speak language that are not theirs. And many of the tribes extinguish. The Carib in the Caribbean extinguish. The Taino almost extinguished in the Caribbean. How is that civilizing people? And how is that bringing the gospel of the kingdom of God? You see? So that's what we call that in our book, rogue servant. Servant who went rogue under their master to serve their personal interest.
Rogue.
Yeah.
Just, the Caribs in the Caribbean, and I don't, it's difficult to know how much is true, but the reputation is that they were the more aggressive of the tribes. As a Taino, I grew up learning that the Caribs would often wage war against the Tainos. And so when I look at Jamaicans, it's impossible for me to think that the Caribs were completely extinguished, because the Jamaicans are very fiery. And obviously that was one of the islands that the Caribs occupied. So I think maybe the Caribs, they mixed in with that Nigerian ancestry and gave us a whole new force to be reckoned with, is what I think.
Well, I mean, there is a lot we will speculate today, but that is for sure. The African descendants in the United States, Latin America, and the Caribbean have mixed not only with the indigenous people, but with the European as well. And the perfect case is sitting before me. That's you. So that's you who have the African, the Taino, and the Spanish heritage. All blended in one person. So that's the reality.
So I have to ask, because it is going to be at the forefront of everyone's mind, if it was not God's will, and we get this question in everything. If it was not God's will, if God didn't design for the enslavement of Africans and indigenous people and the transatlantic slave trade, why did it happen? Why didn't he stop it? People often struggle with, why doesn't God step in to prevent, I mean, to call it a painful journey is an understatement. It's the victimization of continents, it just.
That's a good question. I don't know. But let me briefly say, see, God created us and He gave us freedom. He gave us a free will. With our will, we can choose to submit to God and do His will, obey Him, honor Him, praise and worship Him. With the same will, we can choose to rebel and reject His authority, reject His ways, and follow the desires of our heart. You follow me? And so and this is the same question, when you see a calamity, a catastrophe going on, the tendency is, why has God allowed this to happen? No, like I said earlier, we have to be careful to put the responsibility on God for something that man has done. The wickedness of man should not always be put on God. No. You see, so because when we say why God did not intervene, so God will be speaking in the conscience of people. We have, let me just mention briefly, we have a Christian in Europe. Not only Christian, but you have also some scholar in Europe who were questioning the legitimacy of the transatlantic slave trades. And they were opposing it. Although they were a tiny minority, but you have voices that were standing against it, and And on the continent of Africa, you have chiefs and kings who were fighting to resist. So how do we expect God to intervene? It's through people. It's through our conscience. It's speaking to our conscience. And so we harden our conscience, and we close our heart, and go on and do whatever we are pleased to do. And the blame goes, unfortunately, to God. You see? So, but when you look at it, you look carefully, you can still conclude that, well, God used people to intervene and stop that perversion, that wickedness of the transatlantic slave trades, and also slavery itself, through the people that is in the history, work for to abolish the slave trade, whether is the African who were enslaved in the Americas and have gone, they have got their freedom and become abolitionists, or those conscious white people who decided that no, we can no longer, continue with this. Is not great, such as the Quakers in the United States, the Mennonite who stood against it, and they freed their own slaves because they realized that it was wicked, it was uh, pervert. So they changed the course they were following. You see, uh, so God did intervene, but let's not put the responsibility on God for what mankind is doing, because we will be giving an account to God, not only for the action that we are doing, but for the words and the thought that we are entertaining. So if mankind have to give an account to God for his actions and words, how come God will allow him to go in a wicked path, send him into a wicked path? You understand my way of thinking?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's my short answer. It's not short, but
Well, it's good. I have a lot of other questions, but we're out of time today.
yeah.
But I think maybe we should spend more time talking about who God is in the next episode, because I think it's very difficult to understand who we are
Yes.
until we understand who God is. So maybe that's our next step.
Yeah, in the last episode, we spoke briefly about who we are, but we can still, do that in the next episode and talk about who God is and his nature and character. I guess that can help our audience.
I think so. I think one of the things that I'm trying to do as we speak is think about what questions some of the viewers might have. And so to that respect, anyone who's watching the channel, if you've had any questions, put them in the comments below, because then we can address those questions in the next episode. So that will help us know how to guide the conversation as well.
Correct.
So Joseph, thank you so much for your time. To the viewer, thank you for your time. Don't forget to subscribe, so the next time there's an episode, you get a notification. Write your comments below, share it with your friends. We look forward to hearing with you and connecting with you. And until next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye, and God bless each and everyone.